Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Liam Eves and Ted Traffer, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
Welcome to the final episode with Scott Burgher. We've covered why recruitment misses deadlines and why the problem starts upstream. Today, Scott looks ahead, where AI genuinely helps and why feasibility is still broken. Let's get into it.
You've touched on AI a little bit. Do you have a sense of, if we were to blink and a couple of years go by, how do you think we'll actually be using it in an effective way to support the clinical trials and recruitment and site enrollment in studies?
I think that there's a few different ways that we've got to think about this. And so one directly related to what we were just talking to is study startup. And I think that we want to get all of that paperwork and administrative work done much quicker. So if it, takes, 6 to 12 months to normally get a patient enrolled, how do we bring that down to 2 to 3 months? And what is administrative that we can automate, whether that is document collection, regulatory submissions, IRB correspondence, budget negotiations with the sites, whatever it is, that can all be automated. It could be brought down from months to a matter of weeks, if not days. And even thinking more globally, there are so many, there's GDPR, there's how do we manage global regulations and the nuances for every specific country in a way that we could utilize AI to just automatically update things appropriately based on what is the specific nuance for that country. So that's one way. And so that's more administrative.
Yeah.
Then what we're talking about from a site perspective, and how do we make their process easier? So if there's ways to utilize technology to automate that site process, to educate the site, to identify patients for them in a quicker way, to make sure that our technology is working to transfer their data or their medical records between referring physician to site, obviously in a compliant way, but in a more automated way that is just easier for everyone. And obviously is pulling the data in a way that it could be digested correctly and then packaged appropriately for regulatory submissions and so on. So that's another more administrative way. And then, as we touched upon earlier, is how do we look at the data in a way that's going to help flag and identify the qualified and appropriate patients for a clinical study? And so again, just if we talked about it earlier, the idea of just mining EHR records or lab data, combining it all, looking at a HCP's medical records and understanding if that patient would be qualified. And so something that potentially could have been a manual process that took a coordinator 6 weeks to get through their patients and flag who's appropriate and then organize them by who's coming in for a visit within this time frame and who's going to talk to them, but really prioritizing them appropriately based on the mining of that data, and then building that pathway for the coordinator to communicate with them appropriately and to educate that patient appropriately to get them in. So I think that there's many different ways that AI could be used. Obviously, from an administrative and a workflow perspective, there's going to be a lot of things that we can leverage from other industries. And then from a data perspective, there's going to be things that I think we're going to be at the forefront of, and we're going to not only be able to identify patients, but the real smart companies are then going to learn how to monetize that data appropriately. Mm-hmm. And that's going to, one, impact, just feasibility in general, and change the landscape there in terms of how do we look at that data from that perspective. But then the ultimate goal is hopefully creating digital twins and not having real patients in trials. And we can all look forward to that day where I don't have a job because of that. And, we could predict with a high level of confidence that certain drugs and molecules and therapies are going to work in a very specific way based on certain markers in people's history and things that we already know. And I think that data is definitely going to be king. I think it's about, utilizing the right way. And then again, not that I'm proposing the capitalist view here, but monetizing that data appropriately to support both feasibility and the future of predictive medicine.
I think it's really interesting for me because it connects to your point, Scott, about data being the important part. My view is that software itself is going to matter less and less as a differentiator. We're already seeing things like vibe coding, being able to spin some solutions up, well and quickly. And I think that the reason is that what AI is genuinely remarkable at is that one thing about essentially rearranging and understanding the binary, the ones and the zeros. Everything you've described, the administration taking words and reorganizing them into a regulatory submission, that's exactly that. You're just changing those ones and zeros, but at a binary speed. So if that's the thing that AI does best, then honestly anyone can build it, and the software stop being where the value sits. But here's what I find really interesting is that when things swing so far in one direction, you usually get this polarizing swing back the other way. And I think that in this case, the swing back is actually towards the human element. You're already seeing it in other industries where people are now taking breaks with no phones or deliberately escaping the digital world. And I do wonder whether the same thing will happen in healthcare and research, because I think at the end of the day, what we're really chasing is a treatment. It's a cure for that one thing that matters most. And I often think about that. The saying is, when you're not sick, you want everything, but when you're sick, you only want one thing. So I think the shift that's coming isn't just about AI companies. I think it's about the organizations taking a very deliberate human approach to research, and healthcare might find that that's the differentiator, because precisely everyone else has gone the other way.
That's beautiful. I'm definitely going to use that. When you're not sick and when you're sick. And I'll give you credit. I'll quote you on it.
No, this is great, Scott. I've got a whole pile of things bouncing around in my head just based on some of the topics you went over. Even you just touched briefly on feasibility, and I think about how much the whole feasibility process affects patient recruitment, because most of the time we're not actually selecting sites that have the best potential to enroll in a clinical trial, because this whole feasibility process is so broken. But I don't know, have you seen any solutions or anything that might improve the quality of how we do feasibility in clinical trials, and just like the whole feasibility, not necessarily just the site feasibility, but when we're assessing and sponsors are assessing the feasibility for the whole clinical trial? Have you seen any things that are actually improving that process?
Yeah, I mean, if I think my view is pretty limited to both site and patient. So, are there sites, and then is there the patient prevalence? And so, something I see here at Quest that I think is really great is that when we pull our patient counts, we're actually doing that based on what we know within the protocol today. And so, if the protocol is saying, certain lab values have to be above or below this or that, that's what we're pulling when we look at patients. And so it's not just a prevalence of how many patients have this disease or indication, but it's an actual prevalence of these are likely to be patients that are qualified for your study. And so, it makes a big difference. And then usually what happens is, you've got a CRO that says, oh, that's great. Cure all the patients that have this disease. Well, we've worked with these sites in that area, and they could each, predict that they're going to bring in 80% of your total need of patients. And obviously none of that happens. And so the difference is that, we know that these are patients that are likely to be qualified, and we can probably trace back to an NCT number of who their physician is or who prescribed those labs for them to take that indicates that they're qualified for that study. And those could be sites for your study or referring physicians. And so it's a difference of, it's not just the patients that have this disease, but it's the patients that are highly likely to qualify. And so I think that's where the data is going to start making a difference of, it's not just these high level numbers that won't necessarily translate to, sites that are really productive on your study or patients that are qualified, but it's going to be much more refined to, these are the sites that have done this before and are successful. And these are the patients that are really qualified. These are the needle in a haystack that you're looking for, not the haystack of all the patients and have this disease that 99% of them still won't qualify because they're not in flare or they are on a certain drug that prohibits them from being on the study and so on. So really breaking through that high level and getting more into the weeds. That's specificity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Scott, I want to really be mindful of your time. Where can people find you or connect with you?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm connected to both of you. So if they're connected to you guys, they can find me through that. I work in the health analytics solution group over at Quest Diagnostics. So you could find me there, and would love to, I love this. So if anyone's got questions, if they want to talk about, patient recruitment just from a high level, if they want to talk about what, I could help with on a business level, happy to go there. And really thank you to you guys. This is really awesome, thought-provoking. And, there were a couple things that I've never even heard myself say. So I quickly jotted them down, and, hopefully we could have a conversation in a few months where we've expanded on some of those as well. So thank you guys.
Scott, thank you so much. It's, we always have great conversations. And yeah, just once again, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Scott, for being here today. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you, guys.
Scott gave us a lot to unpack today. Thanks for joining us across this whole series. If you have questions about the episode, contact us through our website at innovatingclinicaltrials.com. Follow the Innovating Clinical Trials podcast on LinkedIn and on your favorite streaming service. While you're there, give us a like or rate the podcast. The Innovating Clinical Trials podcast is hosted by Liam Eves and Ted Trafford and is produced by Tarini Chakurthi. Opinions expressed are those of the participants and not their respective employers.